The lock turned with a sharp click that echoed through the bitter January night, and Theresa Nelson pressed her frozen palms against the rough wooden door, knowing it would not open again until dawn. Behind that door, her husband slept in the warm bed they were supposed to share, but Margaret Owens, his mother, had made it clear from the very first week that a woman who could not produce a child after 2 years of marriage did not deserve the comfort of a roof over her head when the Nevada winter winds howled through Empire City. Teresa wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and descended the creaky porch steps, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The year was 1884, and the mining town of Empire City had seen better days, but it still held enough population to make her nightly exile feel like a public humiliation. She could see lamplight glowing in windows up and down the dirt road, families gathered around fireplaces, children tucked safely into beds, while she made her way to the small lean to behind the house where garden tools were stored during the warmer months. The shelter offered little protection from the cold, but it was better than freezing to death in the open. Teresa had learned to bring blankets out during the day when Margaret went to town for her shopping, hiding them beneath old burlap sacks where her mother-in-law would not think to look. She settled into the corner now, pulling the threadbare wool around herself and trying not to think about how her fingers had gone numb or how her toes ached in her worn boots. Her husband, Thomas Nelson, was a weak man who loved his mother more than he could ever love a wife. Teresa had learned this truth slowly over the months following their wedding, watching as he nodded along with every cruel word Margaret spoke, never once raising his voice in defense of the woman he had promised to honor and cherish. When Margaret declared that barren women brought shame upon a household and needed to be taught humility through suffering, Thomas had simply looked away. Tonight was colder than most, and Teresa found herself shaking violently despite her layers. She pulled her knees to her chest and rocked slowly, trying to generate warmth through movement. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its lonely cry matching the desperation building in her heart. She wondered how much longer she could survive these nights, how many more winters her body could endure before the cold claimed her permanently. The sound of footsteps crunching through frozen dirt made her stiffen. It was too early for dawn, and Thomas never came looking for her during the night. Margaret would certainly never check on her welfare. Teresa held her breath, wondering if she should try to hide or if whoever approached meant her harm. In a mining town like Empire City, plenty of rough men wandered the streets after drinking their wages away at the saloon. "Someone in there?" The voice was deep and masculine, but gentle somehow, without the harsh edge of violence. "I heard something moving around. Did not mean to startle you if you are just trying to sleep." Teresa remained silent, hoping the stranger would move along and leave her to her misery. "Listen, I know it is none of my business, but it is about 5 degrees out here tonight. That lean-to will not keep you alive if the temperature drops anymore. I have a ranch about 2 miles outside of town, and my bunkhouse has an extra room. You are welcome to it, no questions asked." "I am fine," Teresa managed to say through chattering teeth. "Please just leave me be." "You do not sound fine." The man's shadow fell across the opening of the lean-to, and in the moonlight, Teresa could make out a tall figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy coat. "My name is Xavier Owens. I work cattle mostly, some horses too. I came into town tonight to pick up supplies and saw you heading back here. This is the 3rd night this week I have noticed you sleeping in this shed." "Xavier Owens?" Teresa felt her heart sink. "Are you related to Margaret Owens?" "Unfortunately, yes. She is my aunt, though I have not spoken to her in about 5 years. We had a falling out over her treatment of my younger sister. I am guessing you are married to her son, Thomas?" "I am his wife," Teresa confirmed quietly. Xavier crouched down near the opening, and Teresa could see his face more clearly now. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that held genuine concern rather than pity. "She is making you sleep out here? She says I do not deserve the warmth of the house until I give her a grandchild. Thomas agrees with her." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. That woman has always been cruel, but this crosses every line. You will freeze to death out here. Come with me right now. I am not leaving you in this shed. I cannot, Theresa said, though every part of her wanted to accept his offer. Thomas would be furious. Margaret would make everything worse. How much worse could it possibly get? She is trying to kill you, whether she admits it or not. No human being can survive sleeping in freezing temperatures night after night. Xavier stood and held out his hand. I promise you, my ranch is safe. The bunkhouse has a good stove, and the room I am offering has a proper bed with warm quilts. I will not bother you or expect anything from you. You have my word on that. Theresa stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that accepting it would change everything. If she left with this stranger, Thomas would likely never take her back. Margaret would spread rumors throughout Empire City about her abandoning her marriage vows. The whole town would judge her, condemn her, call her an unfaithful wife. But staying meant dying slowly in this frozen shed, night after night, until her body could take no more. She reached up and took Xavier's hand. His grip was warm and steady, pulling her gently to her feet. Her legs had gone stiff from the cold, and she stumbled slightly. Xavier caught her elbow, steadying her with easy strength. My wagon is just up the road, he said softly. Can you walk or do you need help? I can walk, Theresa insisted, though her steps were shaky. She followed him through the darkness, past the house where her husband slept in warmth and comfort, past the neighboring homes with their glowing windows, until they reached a sturdy wagon hitched to two patient horses. Xavier helped her up onto the seat and then climbed up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. We will have you warm soon enough, he promised, clicking to the horses. They started forward at a steady pace, leaving Empire City behind them. Theresa did not look back. The ride to Xavier's ranch took nearly 40 minutes, with the cold wind biting at Theresa's exposed skin despite Xavier draping his own coat around her shoulders. He wore only a thick wool shirt now, but he did not complain about the temperature, focusing instead on guiding the horses along the dark road. Not much further, he said when Theresa's shivering grew worse. Once we get you inside and warm, I will make some hot coffee. You drink coffee? Yes, Theresa managed through clicking teeth. Good. I make terrible tea, but my coffee is decent enough. Despite everything, Theresa felt a small smile tug at her frozen lips. There was something inherently kind about this man, something that made her feel safer than she had felt in years. The ranch came into view gradually, starting with fence lines that stretched out into the darkness, then several buildings silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Xavier guided the wagon toward what appeared to be a large barn, pulling the horses to a stop near a smaller structure that must be the bunkhouse he had mentioned. Wait here just a moment, Xavier said, jumping down from the wagon. He disappeared inside the bunkhouse, and Theresa saw lamplight flare to life through the windows. He emerged a minute later and came around to help her down. The stove was still warm from this morning, so I just added some wood. It will heat up quickly. He kept his hand on her elbow as he guided her inside, and Theresa felt tears spring to her eyes at the blessed warmth that greeted her. The bunkhouse was simple but clean, with a main room containing the stove, a rough wooden table with 4 chairs, and some shelves holding supplies. 2 doors led off to what must be bedrooms. The room on the left is yours, Xavier said, leading her toward it. I sleep in the main house usually, but I keep this place ready for when I hire extra hands during branding season. The room has everything you need. He opened the door to reveal a small but comfortable space containing a real bed with a thick mattress, several quilts folded at the foot, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and even a small chest of drawers. To Theresa, who had spent the last week sleeping in a freezing shed, it looked like absolute luxury. I will bring you some coffee and something to eat, Xavier said. There is a clean nightgown in the top drawer, left behind by my sister when she visited last summer. You are welcome to it, and to anything else you need. I will be right back. He left her alone, and Theresa sank down onto the edge of the bed, her body still shaking with cold, but her heart feeling something other than despair for the first time in months. She heard Xavier moving around in the main room, the clink of dishes and the smell of coffee brewing. When he returned, he carried a steaming cup and a plate with bread, cheese, and some cold chicken. It is not much, he apologized, setting the food on the small table beside the bed. But it will keep you going until morning. I will make a proper breakfast then. This is more than enough, Theresa said, her voice breaking slightly. Thank you. I do not know how to thank you properly for this kindness. Xavier shook his head. No thanks needed. What Margaret is doing to you is wrong, and I am ashamed to share blood with her. You rest now and get warm. If you need anything during the night, just call out. I will be sleeping in the other room tonight so I can keep the stove going. He left before Theresa could protest, closing the door gently behind him. She sat alone in the quiet room, sipping the hot coffee and feeling warmth slowly return to her frozen limbs. The food tasted better than anything she had eaten in weeks, perhaps because she was finally able to eat without Margaret watching her with those hard, judgmental eyes. After she finished eating, Theresa found the nightgown Xavier had mentioned and changed into it gratefully. Her own clothes were damp with sweat and melted snow, and the clean cotton felt wonderful against her skin. She climbed into the bed and pulled the heavy quilts over herself, burrowing into warmth that seemed almost unreal after so many nights of shivering cold. She thought she would lie awake, worrying about what tomorrow would bring, about Thomas and Margaret, and the inevitable consequences of her choice to leave. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her exhausted body finally able to rest without fear of freezing to death. Theresa woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of bacon cooking. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and panic gripped her heart. Then memory returned, along with the realization that she had slept through the entire night in actual warmth and comfort. She rose and dressed quickly in her dry clothes, which someone had draped over a chair while she slept. Her hair was a tangled mess, but she did her best to pin it up properly before venturing out into the main room. Xavier stood at the stove, tending a skillet of bacon and eggs with the casual competence of a man used to cooking for himself. He looked up when she entered and offered a small smile. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Theresa admitted. "Thank you again for bringing me here." "Like I said, no thanks needed." Xavier gestured to the table. "Sit down and have some breakfast. We can talk about what happens next after you eat." Theresa settled into one of the chairs and watched as Xavier efficiently plated the food and brought it to the table along with fresh coffee. He sat down across from her and began eating without ceremony, clearly hungry from whatever work he had already done this morning. "What time is it?" Theresa asked. "About 8. I have been up since 5 doing the morning chores. The cattle need hay this time of year, and the horses always want their grain early." Xavier took a sip of coffee. "I was thinking about your situation. You cannot go back to that house, not with Margaret treating you the way she has been. But you are married to Thomas, which complicates things legally." "I know." Theresa pushed eggs around her plate. "I have nowhere to go, really. No family left alive, no money of my own. Thomas controlled everything, and what Thomas controlled, Margaret controlled." "You could stay here," Xavier said carefully. "I meant what I said last night. That room is yours for as long as you need it. I could use help around the ranch anyway. The house needs a proper cleaning, and I am terrible at mending clothes or cooking anything beyond basic meals. If you wanted to work in exchange for room and board, it would be a fair arrangement." Theresa looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motives. She found only honest sincerity. People would talk. A married woman living at a bachelor's ranch. People already talk about everything in Empire City. At least here you would not be freezing to death at night. Xavier's jaw tightened. I will not pretend to understand all the legal complications of your marriage, but I know right from wrong. What Margaret did to you was wrong, and Thomas allowed it, which makes him just as guilty. You deserve better than that. I do not even know you, Theresa said softly, though she felt in her heart that she could trust this man. Then get to know me, stay for a week, and if you decide you want to leave, I will drive you anywhere you want to go. But give yourself a chance to recover, to sleep in warmth, and eat proper meals. You look half-starved. Theresa realized he was right. She had lost weight over the past months, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Margaret had made sure she received the smallest portions at dinner, and sleeping in the cold burned whatever calories she managed to consume. 1 week, she agreed, and I will work to earn my keep. I will not be a burden to you. You could never be a burden, Xavier said firmly. But if it makes you feel better to help out, I certainly will not complain about having clean laundry and decent food for a change. After breakfast, Xavier showed Theresa around the ranch. It was a modest operation compared to some of the larger cattle ranches in Nevada, but it was clearly well maintained and successful enough to support a comfortable life. He ran about 200 head of cattle and kept a dozen horses, including several mares he was breeding for their speed and stamina. The main house was a solidly built structure with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living area, and even a small room Xavier used as an office for his ranch records. As he had warned, the place needed a woman's touch, with dust coating most surfaces and dishes piled in the sink. I spend most of my time outside, Xavier admitted sheepishly. Housekeeping tends to fall by the wayside. I can fix this, Theresa said, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. It will take a few days of serious work, but I can make this house shine. I do not doubt it. Xavier smiled at her enthusiasm. Take whatever time you need. I will be out checking the fence lines today, but I should be back before dark. Make yourself at home and please eat whatever you find in the pantry. He left her alone in the house, and Theresa immediately set to work. There was something deeply satisfying about scrubbing floors and washing windows, about bringing order to chaos and cleanliness to dirt. At Margaret's house, no amount of work had ever been good enough. Every task criticized and found lacking. Here, she could clean to her own standards, taking pride in a job well done, without fear of harsh words or punishment. By the time Xavier returned that evening, Theresa had transformed the kitchen and living area. The floors gleamed, the windows sparkled, and a stew bubbled on the stove, filling the house with rich, savory smells. Xavier stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the changes. I barely recognize the place. You have been working all day. It felt good to have something productive to do, Theresa admitted. I hope you like beef stew. I found vegetables in the pantry, and that beef you had stored in the cold box. It smells incredible. Xavier washed his hands at the pump and joined her at the table. I cannot remember the last time I came home to a hot meal waiting. They ate together, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had that morning. Xavier told her about finding a section of fence that needed repair, and about one of his mares showing signs of foaling soon. Theresa talked about her plans for tackling the bedrooms and mending the pile of clothes she had discovered in his wardrobe. You do not have to do all that, Xavier protested. I hired you for room and board, not to work yourself to exhaustion. I want to do it, Theresa insisted. For the first time in 2 years, I feel useful. Margaret made me feel worthless every day, like I was nothing but a burden and a disappointment. This, working here and seeing actual results, it reminds me that I have value. Xavier's expression softened. You always had value. Margaret was the worthless one, not you. The week passed quickly, falling into a comfortable routine. Theresa woke each morning in her warm bed, ate breakfast with Xavier, and then spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and organizing. Xavier worked outside, tending his cattle and horses, repairing equipment, and handling the endless tasks required to keep a ranch running smoothly. They ate dinner together each evening, and Theresa found herself looking forward to those meals more than she wanted to admit. Xavier was easy to talk to, with a quiet sense of humor and a thoughtful way of listening that made her feel heard and valued. He asked about her life before marrying Thomas, and she told him about growing up as the daughter of a shopkeeper in Virginia City, about losing her parents to influenza when she was 19, about accepting Thomas's proposal because she had no other options and he had seemed kind enough at first. He changed after we married, Theresa said one evening as they sat by the fire in the living room. Or maybe he was always weak and I just did not see it clearly. Margaret moved in with us after only 3 months, claiming she needed help in her old age, even though she was perfectly healthy. From that moment on, she ran our household, and Thomas let her do it. My aunt has always been a controlling woman, Xavier said. My father was her younger brother, and she tried to run his life too until he finally had enough and cut ties with her. She was furious about it, swore that our whole family would suffer for his disobedience. When my sister married against Margaret's wishes, Margaret showed up at the wedding and caused a scene. That was the last time I spoke to her. Does your sister live nearby? Theresa asked. In California now. She married a rancher out there, and they have 3 children. She writes to me regularly, and I visit when I can. Xavier smiled. She is happy, which is all that matters. Margaret predicted doom and failure for her marriage, but 5 years later, they are more in love than ever. That must be nice, Theresa said softly. Being in love, I mean. I thought that was what marriage would be, but it never felt that way with Thomas. Xavier looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. You deserve to know what that feels like. Real love from someone who values you and treats you with respect. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. At the end of the week, Xavier asked if Theresa planned to stay or go. She did not hesitate in her answer. I want to stay if you will still have me. This is your home for as long as you want it, Xavier said simply. Welcome to the ranch, Theresa. 2 weeks after Theresa's arrival, Thomas finally came looking for her. Xavier spotted him riding up the road toward the ranch house and immediately went to find Theresa, who was hanging laundry on the line behind the house. Thomas is here, Xavier said quietly. You do not have to face him if you do not want to. I can send him away. Theresa's hands stilled on the wet sheet she had been pinning up. Her heart raced with anxiety, but beneath the fear was something new and stronger, a determination not to be bullied anymore. No, I will talk to him. He has a right to know where I am, even if I do not plan to return. Xavier nodded. I will be right there with you. He will not hurt you or drag you away against your will. They walked together to the front of the house, where Thomas sat on his horse looking uncomfortable and out of place. He had always been a town man, preferring the saloon and the general store to open spaces and physical labor. Seeing him here on Xavier's ranch emphasized how different the two men were, despite their shared connection to Margaret. Theresa, Thomas said, dismounting awkwardly. You need to come home. Mother is very upset about your disappearance. People are starting to talk. I am not disappearing, Theresa replied, keeping her voice steady. I am living here now. I work for Mr. Owens in exchange for room and board. Thomas's face reddened. You are my wife. Your place is in our home, not working as a servant for some cowboy. My place was locked outside in a freezing shed every night, Theresa shot back, her anger rising. You and your mother decided I did not deserve basic shelter because I have not given birth yet. I nearly froze to death, Thomas, multiple times, and you did nothing to stop it. Mother said it would teach you humility and faith. She said God would bless us with a child once you learned your place. Your mother is cruel and abusive, and you are weak for letting her control your life. The words came out sharper than Theresa intended, but they were true, and she was tired of pretending otherwise. Thomas looked genuinely shocked, as though the idea that he might be at fault had never occurred to him. How dare you speak to me that way? I am your husband. A husband protects his wife, Xavier interjected, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. A husband makes sure his wife is safe and warm and cared for. You did none of those things. You let your mother abuse Theresa, and now you have the audacity to come here and demand she return to that situation? This is none of your business, Xavier. You always thought you were better than the rest of the family. I am better than any person who would treat another human being the way you and Margaret treated Theresa. Xavier stepped slightly in front of Theresa, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed. She is not going back with you. She has a home here now, and she is safe. She is my wife, Thomas insisted. Legally, she has to obey me. Legally, you are supposed to provide for her and protect her, Xavier countered. You broke that contract first. Now leave before I lose my patience. Thomas looked between them, his face growing redder with impotent rage. Everyone in town will know about this. Everyone will know that my wife is living in sin with another man. You will both be ruined. Let them talk, Theresa said, surprised by her own courage. I would rather be ruined in the eyes of Empire City than freeze to death in your mother's shed. Now go, Thomas. There is nothing here for you. Thomas stared at her for another moment, then turned and mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. You will regret this, both of you. He kicked his horse into a gallop and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. Theresa felt her knees go weak, and Xavier caught her elbow, steadying her. Are you all right? I stood up to him, Theresa said, half laughing, half crying. I actually stood up to him. I did not think I could do that. You are stronger than you know, Xavier said gently. Come on, let us go inside. You are shaking. They went into the house and Xavier made tea while Theresa sat at the kitchen table trying to process what had just happened. Part of her felt liberated, free from the weight of her terrible marriage. Another part worried about the consequences, about what Margaret would do now that Thomas had returned empty-handed. Do you think they will cause trouble? Theresa asked when Xavier brought the tea. Probably. Margaret is vindictive and Thomas is embarrassed. They will likely spread rumors and try to make life difficult for both of us. Xavier sat down across from her. But I do not care what people in Empire City think. This ranch is far enough outside of town that their opinions do not affect my business much. The important thing is that you are safe. I have brought problems to your doorstep, Theresa said miserably. You saved my life, and now I am repaying you by causing you trouble. You have brought joy to my doorstep, Xavier corrected her. For the first time in years, I look forward to coming home at the end of the day. The house feels like a home instead of just a building. You sing while you work, and the sound makes me smile even when I am out mending fences. You have given me far more than I have given you. Theresa met his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, and felt something shift in her chest. Over the past 2 weeks, she had been so focused on recovering from Margaret's abuse and adjusting to her new life that she had not fully acknowledged the growing feelings she had for Xavier. But they were there, undeniable, and getting stronger every day. She cared for this man who had rescued her from the cold and asked nothing in return. She admired his kindness and his strength, his dedication to his work, and his gentle humor. She found herself watching for him during the day, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, looking forward to their evening conversations by the fire. Xavier, she said softly, what are we doing here, really? He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I am giving you a safe place to heal and recover. That is all I intended when I brought you here. But I would be lying if I said my feelings had not grown into something more. I care about you, Theresa, more than I probably should, considering you are technically still married. Technically, Theresa repeated. But not in any way that matters. Thomas broke our marriage vows when he let his mother abuse me. I feel no loyalty to him anymore. Even so, the law sees it differently. Unless you divorce him, or he divorces you, you are still bound together legally. Xavier reached across the table and gently took her hand. I am willing to wait however long it takes. I know it is too soon for you to think about any of this seriously. You just escaped a terrible situation, and you need time to figure out who you are outside of that marriage. But I want you to know that I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Theresa felt tears prick her eyes at his words. You are a good man, Xavier Owens, the best man I have ever known. I just try to do what is right, Xavier said. And right now, what is right is making sure you are safe and happy. Everything else can wait. Spring came slowly to Empire City, the frozen ground gradually thawing and the first hints of green appearing on the hills surrounding Xavier's ranch. Theresa had been living at the ranch for 3 months now, and the transformation in her was remarkable. She had gained back the weight she lost during her time with Margaret. Her skin had regained its healthy color, and her eyes sparkled with life instead of dull resignation. She had also become an integral part of the ranch operations. Beyond keeping the house clean and cooking meals, she had taken over the kitchen garden, planting vegetables and herbs that would provide fresh food throughout the summer. She helped Xavier with the horses, discovering a natural talent for working with the animals. One of the mares had foaled in late February, and Theresa had stayed up all night with Xavier to make sure the birth went smoothly, both of them rejoicing when a healthy colt was born. Working together, spending nearly every hour of every day in each other's company, their feelings had deepened into something that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Xavier was careful never to push or rush her, but Theresa could see the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She caught herself doing the same thing, watching him work with the cattle or repair a fence post, admiring the strength and competence he brought to every task. One evening in early April, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was finally warm enough to enjoy being outside without heavy coats, and Theresa felt something like contentment settling over her. I need to go into Empire City tomorrow, Xavier said. We are running low on some supplies, and I want to check on that order of lumber for the new barn. You are welcome to come with me if you want, or you can stay here. Theresa had avoided going into town since leaving Thomas, afraid of the confrontation and judgment that would surely come. But she could not hide forever. I will come with you. It is time I faced whatever consequences are waiting. You do not have to, Xavier said gently. I can handle the gossip. I know, but I want to go. I want people to see that I am not ashamed of my choices. The next morning, they drove into Empire City together in Xavier's wagon. Theresa kept her head high as they passed familiar buildings and familiar faces, though she could feel people staring and whispering. Xavier stopped the wagon outside the general store, and they went inside together. The proprietor, Mr. Jameson, looked up from his ledger, and his expression shifted from welcoming to uncertain when he saw Theresa. Miss Theresa, Mrs. Nelson, I did not expect to see you here. I am picking up supplies for the ranch, Theresa said calmly. We need flour, sugar, coffee, and salt. Mr. Jameson glanced at Xavier, then back to Theresa. Of course, I will get those items for you right away. While Mr. Jameson gathered their supplies, other customers came into the store, including Mrs. Patterson, one of Margaret's closest friends. The woman's eyes widened when she saw Theresa, and she immediately bustled over with an expression of false concern. Theresa, my dear, we have all been so worried about you. Margaret said you ran away in the middle of the night without a word. Poor Thomas has been beside himself. I did not run away, Theresa replied evenly. I left because I was being locked outside in freezing temperatures every night. I nearly died from exposure, Mrs. Patterson. Xavier offered me shelter and employment, and I accepted. Mrs. Patterson's face pinched with disapproval. Living alone with an unmarried man. Surely you understand how that looks. I understand that staying with my husband and his mother would have killed me. I will take scandal over death any day. Well, I never, Mrs. Patterson huffed. Margaret warned me that you had become prideful and disobedient. I see she was right. Xavier stepped forward, his presence imposing. Mrs. Patterson, you and Margaret can spread whatever lies you want about Teresa's character, but everyone in this town knows what Margaret is really like, even if they are too polite to say it out loud. Deep down, you all know that locking someone outside during a Nevada winter is attempted murder, plain and simple. If you want to defend that behavior, that says more about you than it does about Teresa. Mrs. Patterson turned red and hurried out of the store without another word. Mr. Jameson finished loading their supplies into crates, looking distinctly uncomfortable. That will be $4.30. Xavier paid the bill, and they carried the supplies out to the wagon. As they were loading the last crate, Thomas appeared on the street, walking toward them with determined steps. Teresa, I need to speak with you, he said without preamble. We have nothing to discuss, Teresa replied, not bothering to look at him. Mother wants you to know that she is willing to forgive you if you come home now. She understands that you were confused and led astray, but there is still time to make things right. Teresa turned to face her husband fully, seeing him clearly for the first time. He was weak-chinned and soft-bodied, with eyes that shifted away from direct contact. How had she ever thought he could protect her or provide for her? Tell your mother that I do not need her forgiveness because I have done nothing wrong. Tell her that I will never return to that house, not for any reason, and tell her that if she truly wants to see a grandchild someday, she should look elsewhere because I would rather die childless than bring a baby into her poisonous presence. Thomas's face cycled through several emotions: shock, anger, humiliation, and finally resignation. You have changed. You are not the woman I married. You are right, Teresa agreed. The woman you married was scared and alone and desperate for any kind of security. The woman standing before you now knows her own worth and refuses to settle for cruelty disguised as marriage. I have changed, Thomas, and it is the best thing that ever happened to me. She climbed up onto the wagon seat beside Xavier, who clicked to the horses. As they pulled away, Teresa did not look back at Thomas standing in the street. That part of her life was over, and she felt only relief. On the ride back to the ranch, Xavier reached over and squeezed her hand. I am proud of you. That took courage. I had a good example to follow, Teresa said, squeezing back. You have shown me what it means to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. We make a good team, Xavier said softly. Yes, Teresa agreed, her heart full. We do. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long days of sunshine and warm nights filled with the chirping of crickets. The ranch thrived under their combined care. The cattle fattened on good grass, the garden produced abundant vegetables, and the young colt grew strong and playful under Teresa's attentive care. Teresa found herself happier than she had ever been in her life. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her previous life never had been. She woke each morning eager to start the day, whether that meant working in the garden, helping Xavier with the horses, or preparing meals in the cheerful kitchen. But more than the work, it was Xavier's presence that made everything brighter. They had fallen into an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs, working together seamlessly, and finding joy in small moments of shared laughter or comfortable silence. One evening in late June, after a particularly long day of helping Xavier move the cattle to a new grazing area, they sat together on the porch steps, too tired to bother going inside just yet. The sun was setting, painting everything in golden light, and Teresa felt Xavier's shoulder pressing against hers. I got a letter from my lawyer today, Xavier said quietly. I asked him to look into your marriage situation to see what options existed for dissolving it legally. Teresa's heart skipped a beat. What did he say? He said that given the circumstances, the documented abuse and abandonment, you would have grounds for divorce. It would take time and money, and it would not be pleasant. Thomas and Margaret would likely fight it. But it is possible. Would you help me? Theresa asked. Would you stand by me through that process? Xavier turned to look at her, his eyes serious and warm in the fading light. Theresa, I would stand by you through anything. I love you. I have loved you for months now, probably since the night I found you freezing in that shed. I know it is complicated, and I know the timing is not ideal, but I cannot keep pretending that my feelings are anything less than what they are. Theresa felt her breath catch. She had known her own feelings for weeks now, but hearing Xavier say the words out loud made everything real in a way it had not been before. I love you too. I tried not to, tried to tell myself it was too soon and too complicated, but I cannot help it. You saved my life, Xavier, and then you gave me a reason to live it fully. How could I not love you? Xavier reached up and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Then let us do this right. Let us get you divorced from Thomas properly and legally. And when that is done, when you are truly free, I want to marry you. I want to make this arrangement permanent, to build a life together that is not based on convenience or desperation, but on genuine love and partnership. Yes, Theresa whispered. Yes to all of it. Xavier leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Theresa's first real kiss, the first time she had been touched with tenderness and desire rather than obligation. When they pulled apart, she was crying, but they were happy tears. We will face whatever comes together, Xavier promised. Margaret and Thomas, the town gossip, the legal battles, all of it. We will face it together. Together, Theresa agreed and kissed him again. The divorce process was every bit as difficult as Xavier's lawyer had predicted. Thomas initially refused to agree to the divorce, insisting that Theresa was still his wife and needed to return home. It took the lawyer presenting detailed testimony from several people who had witnessed Margaret locking Theresa out at night, including a neighbor who had nearly called the sheriff over the situation before Thomas finally agreed to the proceedings. Margaret tried to spread vicious rumors about Theresa and Xavier, claiming that Theresa had been unfaithful during her marriage and that Xavier had seduced her away from her rightful husband. But most people in Empire City had known Margaret long enough to recognize her tactics. The rumors gained little traction, especially after the pastor of the local church publicly condemned Margaret's treatment of Theresa as unchristian and cruel. Throughout it all, Xavier stood firmly by Theresa's side. He accompanied her to every legal meeting, held her when she cried from frustration and anxiety, and reminded her constantly that they were doing the right thing. Finally, in October of 1885, nearly a year after Xavier had found Theresa freezing in the shed, the divorce was finalized. Thomas had agreed to it in the end, perhaps realizing that forcing Theresa to remain married to him gained him nothing but continued humiliation. Margaret had reportedly been furious, but there was nothing she could do to stop the legal dissolution of the marriage. The day the final papers were signed, Xavier and Theresa stood outside the courthouse in Empire City, holding hands and feeling the weight of months of struggle finally lift from their shoulders. You are free, Xavier said, smiling down at her. Truly free. We are free, Theresa corrected. Free to live our lives the way we choose. They returned to the ranch that evening and celebrated with a simple dinner and a bottle of wine Xavier had been saving for a special occasion. As they sat together by the fireplace, Xavier pulled out a small box from his pocket. I know we have been through a lot together, and I know you might want time to enjoy your freedom before making any new commitments, he said. But I meant what I said last summer. I want to marry you, Theresa. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Will you be my wife? He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. Nothing extravagant, but beautiful in its sincerity. Theresa did not hesitate. Yes, absolutely, yes. Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed in the firelight, both of them laughing with joy and relief and anticipation for the future they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch, with Xavier's sister and her family traveling from California to attend. A few friends from neighboring ranches came as well, people who had known Xavier for years and were genuinely happy to see him find love. There was no fancy dress or elaborate decorations, just Theresa in a simple blue gown she had sewn herself and Xavier in his best suit, standing together in front of the pastor and promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Theresa with such tenderness that several of the guests wiped away tears. This was what marriage was supposed to be: two people choosing each other freely, committing to partnership and love without coercion or cruelty. The celebration that followed was joyful and relaxed, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Xavier's sister, Martha, pulled Theresa aside at one point and hugged her tightly. "I am so glad Xavier found you," Martha said warmly. "He has been alone for too long, throwing himself into work and avoiding any kind of personal happiness. You have brought light back into his life." "He saved mine," Theresa replied simply. "I would have died without him." "Then you saved each other," Martha said. "That is how the best marriages work." As the party wound down and the guests departed, Xavier and Theresa stood on their porch watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Xavier wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Owens?" he asked softly. "Like the luckiest woman in Nevada," Theresa replied, leaning back into his embrace. "Like I finally found where I belong." "You belong here with me," Xavier said. "Always." They went inside to the house that had become their home, closing the door behind them but never locking it. In Xavier's house, doors stayed open because there was nothing to fear, only love and warmth, and the promise of all the tomorrows they would share together. The first year of their marriage was everything Theresa had ever dreamed marriage could be. She and Xavier worked together during the days, their partnership extending from the house to the barn to the wide open rangeland where the cattle grazed. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, discovering small ways to make each other smile or ease each other's burdens. Xavier proved to be an attentive and affectionate husband, nothing like the cold distance Theresa had experienced with Thomas. He kissed her goodbye each morning before heading out to work and greeted her with genuine enthusiasm when he returned each evening. He asked about her day and listened to her answers, valuing her opinions on everything from which crops to plant in the garden to how to handle a difficult business negotiation. In return, Theresa poured her heart into making their home a place of comfort and joy. She cooked Xavier's favorite meals, mended his clothes with careful stitches, and filled the house with small touches that made it feel warm and welcoming. She learned to help with the harder ranch work too, becoming skilled at roping and branding during the spring roundup and proving herself capable of sitting a horse for hours at a time when they needed to move cattle. But it was the quiet evenings together that Theresa treasured most, the times when they sat by the fire, reading or talking, Xavier's hand holding hers, their feet touching beneath the table. These moments of simple intimacy were more precious to her than gold, proof that she was loved and valued and cherished. In the spring of 1886, Theresa began to suspect that she might be pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be certain, scarcely daring to hope after years of Margaret's cruel taunts about her barrenness. But as the signs became undeniable, she finally told Xavier one evening after dinner. "I think I am with child," she said quietly, watching his face for his reaction. Xavier's eyes went wide, and then he was out of his chair and sweeping her into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of joy. "Are you sure? Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor," Theresa laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "I have all the signs. I think the baby will come in late autumn." Xavier set her down carefully, as though she might break, his hands moving to her still flat stomach. "We are going to be parents." "I am going to be a father." "Are you happy?" Theresa asked, though she could see the answer written clearly on his face. "Happy does not begin to describe it," Xavier said, his voice thick with emotion. You have given me everything, Theresa. A home, a partnership, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve such blessings, but I thank God for them every single day. They held each other for a long time, both of them crying happy tears and dreaming about the future that awaited them. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Theresa bloomed with health and happiness. Xavier was comically overprotective, insisting she rest frequently and take on none of the heavier chores. Theresa humored him when she could, knowing his concern came from love, but she was not willing to become an invalid just because she was carrying a child. Martha came to visit in August, bringing her own children and planning to stay through the birth to help Theresa. The two women became close friends during those months, and Martha shared stories about her own pregnancies that made Theresa feel less anxious about the experience ahead. In late November, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Theresa went into labor. Xavier sent one of his ranch hands racing into Empire City to fetch the doctor while Martha stayed with Theresa, coaching her through the contractions with calm assurance. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Xavier paced the living room, unable to sit still, jumping at every sound from the bedroom. When he finally heard the thin, piercing wail of a newborn baby, he nearly broke down the door in his eagerness to get inside. "It is a boy," Martha announced, beaming as she held up the squalling infant. "A healthy, strong boy with good lungs." Xavier moved to the bedside, where Theresa lay, exhausted but glowing with joy. The doctor placed the baby in her arms, and she looked down at the tiny face with wonder. "Our son," she whispered. "Our son," Xavier repeated, his voice choked with emotion. He sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both Theresa and the baby, his family, the most precious things in his world. They named the baby Samuel, after Xavier's father. Samuel Owens came into the world during a Nevada winter, but unlike his mother before him, he was surrounded by warmth and love from his very first breath. The house that had once been cold and empty with loneliness now rang with baby cries and lullabies, with the sounds of family. Theresa recovered quickly from the birth, and she took to motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and curious, with his father's dark hair and his mother's bright eyes. Xavier was utterly besotted with his son, spending every free moment holding him or talking to him or simply watching him sleep. As winter deepened and the snows piled high around the ranch, Theresa found herself thinking about that terrible time when she had shivered in Margaret's shed, certain she would die from the cold. It seemed like a lifetime ago now, though it had been barely 2 years. She was a completely different person from the frightened, abused woman Xavier had rescued. One night, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside their bed and Xavier's arms wrapped around her, Theresa whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." "For what?" Xavier murmured sleepily. "For finding me, for saving me, for giving me this life." Xavier pulled her closer. "You saved me too, you know. I was just going through the motions before you came, working myself into exhaustion to avoid thinking about how lonely I was. You brought joy and purpose and love into my life. We saved each other, Theresa. That is what love does." Theresa thought about his words as she drifted off to sleep, warm and safe and cherished in her husband's arms. He was right. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had built something beautiful together. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the ordinary joys and challenges that make up a life well lived. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a modest operation into one of the more successful cattle ranches in that part of Nevada. Xavier's reputation for honest dealing and quality stock spread, and buyers came from as far away as California to purchase his horses and cattle. Theresa proved to have a good head for business, keeping meticulous records and helping Xavier negotiate better prices for their goods. She also expanded the garden into a small orchard, planting apple and peach trees that would provide fruit for years to come. Samuel grew from a baby into a toddler, and then a young boy, healthy and happy and full of questions about everything he saw. He followed his father around the ranch from the time he could walk, learning about cattle and horses and the land that would someday be his inheritance. When Samuel was 3 years old, Teresa gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth. 2 years after that, another son arrived, named Daniel after Teresa's father. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now overflowed with the noise and chaos of children, with laughter and tears, and the constant motion of young life. Xavier was a devoted father, patient and loving with all three children. He taught them to ride and rope, to care for animals, and to respect the land that provided their livelihood. But he also made sure they learned their letters and numbers, believing that education was important even for ranch children. Teresa watched her husband with their children and felt her heart swell with love. This was the man who had offered her shelter when she was freezing to death, who had asked nothing in return, who had stood by her through scandal and legal battles, who had loved her when she felt unlovable. He was everything a husband and father should be, and she thanked God daily for leading her to him. They heard news of Thomas and Margaret occasionally through the years. Thomas had remarried a few years after the divorce, taking a much younger wife who gave him 3 children in quick succession. By all accounts, Margaret still ruled the household with an iron fist, making her new daughter-in-law's life miserable, much as she had made Teresa's miserable. Teresa felt only pity for Thomas's new wife and hoped the young woman would have the strength to escape if things became too unbearable. She herself had no regrets about leaving. Her life with Xavier and their children was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream of during those dark nights in the shed. In the summer of 1895, when Samuel was 8, Elizabeth was 5, and Daniel was 3, Xavier decided to expand the ranch by purchasing the adjacent property. The previous owner had died, and his children wanted to sell rather than try to maintain the place themselves. "It would nearly double our land," Xavier explained to Teresa as they discussed the potential purchase. "We could run more cattle, plant more crops, maybe even start raising sheep if we wanted to diversify." "Can we afford it?" Teresa asked practically. "We have the savings, and the land is priced fairly. It would stretch us thin for a year or two, but I think it is worth the investment." Xavier paused, looking at her seriously. "But I will not do it unless you agree. This is your ranch too, Teresa. We are partners in everything." Teresa loved him all the more for saying that, for recognizing that she was not just his wife, but his equal partner in building their life together. "I think we should do it. The children are getting older, and they will need their own futures secured. More land means more opportunity for all of them." They purchased the property and spent the next 2 years developing it, building new fences, improving the pastures, and constructing additional outbuildings. It was hard work, requiring long hours and physical labor, but they tackled it together, as they always did, and the results were worth the effort. By the turn of the century, the Owens Ranch was one of the most respected operations in Nevada. Xavier and Teresa had built something lasting and substantial, a legacy they could pass down to their children and their children's children. But more important than the material success was the love that permeated every aspect of their lives. Their marriage had only grown stronger with time, deepening into the kind of partnership that comes from years of working together, weathering storms together, and choosing each other every single day. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1900, Xavier took Teresa out to the porch where they had shared so many important moments over the years. The children were asleep inside, watched over by a hired girl who helped around the house now that the family had grown. 15 years, Xavier said, pulling Teresa into his arms. 15 years since I made you my wife, though I think I loved you long before that day. 15 years of happiness, Teresa agreed, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. I cannot imagine my life without you, Xavier. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. We are the best thing that ever happened to each other, Xavier corrected gently. That night I found you freezing in that shed. I thought I was just helping someone in need. I did not know I was finding the other half of my soul, the person who would make me whole and give my life meaning. Teresa lifted her face to look at him, seeing the love shining in his eyes. After 15 years, he still looked at her the way he had on their wedding day, with wonder and devotion and joy. I love you, she said simply. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Xavier replied, and kissed her beneath the stars, just as he had done countless times before, and would do countless times again in all the years to come. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to hard work and dedication. The doors of the house stood unlocked, always open, because in this home there was nothing to fear and everything to celebrate. Teresa had come to this place broken and desperate, freezing in the winter cold, locked out by cruelty and indifference. Xavier had given her warmth and shelter, asking nothing in return. But what had started as simple rescue had blossomed into the deepest love, a partnership that transcended the hardships they faced and built something beautiful from the ashes of Teresa's old life. This was home, not just a house or a ranch, but a true home built on love and respect and equality. A home where doors stayed open because everyone was welcome, where warmth was freely given, where children grew up knowing they were cherished. This was the life Margaret's cruelty had inadvertently given Teresa, pushing her out into the cold where Xavier could find her. This was the love that had grown from suffering and bloomed into joy. This was everything that mattered, everything that was real and true and lasting. And as Teresa stood on the porch with her husband's arms around her, looking out at the land they had built together and the future that stretched before them, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living the life she was always supposed to live. The cowboy had given her a home where doors stayed open. But more than that, he had given her love, partnership, respect, and freedom. He had given her a family and a future. He had given her everything, and she had given him the same in return, their two lives intertwining so completely that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. They were partners, lovers, best friends, and soulmates, bound together by choice and love rather than obligation or law. This was their story, born in winter cold but warmed by love that would last forever. This was their legacy, passed down to their children and their children's children, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of love, and the beauty of two souls finding each other against all odds. The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm that brought new joys and occasional sorrows, as all lives do. Samuel grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did, taking on more responsibilities as he matured and showing a natural gift for working with the horses. Elizabeth proved to be clever with numbers and took over much of the ranch bookkeeping by the time she was 14, her neat columns of figures helping Xavier understand the business side of ranching even better. Daniel, the youngest, had his mother's gentle way with the garden and his father's adventurous spirit, always exploring the furthest corners of their property and coming home with stories about what he had discovered. In 1905, tragedy struck when Martha's husband died in a riding accident in California. Martha wrote to Xavier and Teresa, heartbroken and uncertain about her future. Without hesitation, they invited her to come stay at the ranch with her now-grown children, offering her a place to heal and recover. Martha arrived in the spring, and having her there brought a new dimension to the household. The two women who had already been close friends became even closer, working together in the kitchen and garden, talking late into the night about life and loss and the unexpected ways that fate shapes us. "I am grateful you have each other," Martha said one afternoon as she and Teresa worked in the vegetable garden. "When I lost my husband, I felt like the world had ended. But being here, seeing the life you and Xavier have built together, it gives me hope that joy is still possible even after heartbreak." Joy is always possible, Theresa said gently. I know that better than most. My first marriage nearly killed me, literally. But Xavier showed me what real love looks like, and that changed everything. You will find your way through this grief, Martha. You are stronger than you know. Martha lived with them for 2 years, and during that time, she regained her strength and spirit. She eventually decided to settle permanently in Empire City, buying a small house in town and opening a dress shop that quickly became popular with the local women. She remained close to Xavier and Theresa, visiting the ranch often and becoming a beloved aunt figure to their children. As Samuel approached his 20th birthday, he began courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, the daughter of one of Xavier's longtime friends. Her name was Catherine, and she was a sweet-natured girl with a ready smile and a good work ethic. Xavier and Theresa approved of the match, seeing how genuinely happy Samuel was when he was with her. The wedding took place in the summer of 1907, held at the Owens Ranch, just as Xavier and Theresa's wedding had been. It was a larger affair this time, with more guests and more elaborate preparations, but the heart of it remained the same: two people choosing each other freely and promising to build a life together. Xavier stood with his arm around Theresa, watching their eldest son marry his sweetheart, and felt the weight of time passing. He was 47 now, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Theresa was 42, still beautiful to him, though her face showed the marks of a life fully lived. We are getting old, he murmured to her as the ceremony concluded. We are getting older, Theresa corrected with a smile. There is a difference. We still have plenty of life left to live, Xavier Owens. Plenty of sunrises to watch and grandchildren to spoil. She was right, as she usually was. A year after Samuel's wedding, their first grandchild was born, a healthy baby boy named David. Samuel and Catherine built a house on the ranch property, close enough to be part of the daily operations, but far enough away to have their own space and privacy. Elizabeth showed no interest in marrying, much to Theresa's private amusement. She was content with her books and her numbers, helping run the ranch business and occasionally traveling to Denver or San Francisco to negotiate deals for cattle or equipment. She was independent and capable, carving out her own path in a world that did not always know what to make of unmarried women who ran businesses. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, spent a year traveling through the Western Territories when he turned 20, sending letters home describing the wonders he saw, but he always returned to the ranch, admitting that nowhere else felt like home. In 1912, when Theresa was 47, she received word that Thomas had died. Pneumonia had taken him quickly, leaving behind his second wife and their children. Theresa felt a strange mixture of emotions at the news. She had long since forgiven Thomas for his weakness, understanding that he had been as much a victim of Margaret's controlling nature as she had been. But she did not mourn him either. That part of her life was too distant, too separate from the woman she had become. Margaret outlived her son by 3 years, finally dying in 1915 at the age of 78. Theresa learned of her death from a letter sent by Thomas's widow, who wrote that Margaret had been bitter and difficult until the very end, making everyone around her miserable with her constant criticisms and demands. I wasted so much time being afraid of her, Theresa said to Xavier the night they received the news. She was just a cruel, unhappy woman who wanted everyone else to be as miserable as she was. But you escaped, Xavier reminded her. You found your way out of that darkness and into the light. That took courage, Theresa. More courage than most people ever have to summon. I had help, Theresa said, taking his hand. I had you. We had each other, Xavier corrected, just as he always did when she gave him too much credit for their happiness. The years of the Great War passed, with distant echoes reaching even their remote ranch. Daniel, now in his mid-20s, felt compelled to enlist despite his parents' fears. He served for a year in France, returning home in 1918 with shadows in his eyes, but his spirit intact. The war changed him, made him more serious and contemplative, but the love of his family and the healing power of the land gradually brought back his smile. By 1920, Xavier and Theresa had been married for 35 years. They were in their 60s now, still active but slowing down, letting their children and grandchildren take on more of the physical labor required to run the ranch. Samuel had proven to be an excellent manager, and with Catherine's help, they kept the operation running smoothly. Elizabeth had surprised everyone by finally marrying at age 39, choosing a widowed banker from Empire City who appreciated her intelligence and independence. They had no children, but they were content with each other's company and with being aunt and uncle to Samuel's growing brood of children. Daniel met a young widow with two small children at Martha's dress shop in town. Her name was Sarah, and she had lost her husband to influenza during the epidemic of 1918. Daniel fell in love with both Sarah and her children, and they married in a quiet ceremony in 1921. He adopted her children as his own and became a devoted father to them, proving that family is built through love rather than blood. Through all these changes and passages, Xavier and Theresa remained the steady center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love had not dimmed with time, but had deepened, becoming the kind of profound connection that comes from decades of partnership. They still sat together on the porch most evenings when the weather was fine, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky. The ranch had changed dramatically from the modest operation Xavier had run alone, but the core of it remained the same: land and cattle and horses, hard work and honest living. "Do you ever think about that night?" Theresa asked one evening in the late summer of 1925. They were both 70 now, weathered and worn but still strong in the ways that mattered. "The night you found me in the shed?" "Sometimes," Xavier admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding past, to minding my own business and leaving you there to freeze. Something made me stop, some instinct or divine intervention, I am not sure which, but I thank God every day that I did stop, that I offered you a way out." "I was so scared," Theresa remembered. "Scared to accept your help, scared of what would happen if I left, scared of everything, but I was more scared of dying in that cold shed. You gave me courage when I had none left." "You have always been brave," Xavier said firmly. "From that first moment when you took my hand and chose to live instead of just surviving, you have been the bravest person I know." "We make a good pair," Theresa said with a smile, using the same words he had spoken to her so many years ago. "The best pair," Xavier agreed, and leaned over to kiss her cheek. Their children and grandchildren had gathered at the ranch for a celebration of their 40th wedding anniversary, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. Samuel and Catherine's children, now ranging from teenagers to young adults, played with Daniel and Sarah's children in the yard. Elizabeth and her husband sat on the porch discussing business with Samuel, planning the next year's operations. Martha, now in her 80s but still spry and sharp-witted, had come from town with several of her grown children and grandchildren. The property that had once been so quiet and lonely now overflowed with family, with love, with life. As Theresa looked around at all the people gathered to celebrate their marriage, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. From that desperate night when she had been locked out in the freezing cold, unable to see any future beyond the next painful dawn, she had somehow arrived at this moment, surrounded by children and grandchildren, respected and loved, having built a life of meaning and purpose. "Thank you," she whispered to Xavier as they stood together receiving congratulations from their guests. "For what?" he asked, though he must have known. "For everything. For stopping that night, for offering me a home, for loving me when I could not love myself, for giving me this family and this life, for being exactly who you are." Xavier pulled her close, uncaring that everyone was watching. "I could say the same to you. You took a lonely cowboy with an empty house and turned it into a home filled with warmth and love. You gave me children and grandchildren, laughter and joy, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. We built this together, Theresa, every bit of it together." As the celebration continued around them, They stole a quiet moment alone in the house, retreating to their bedroom where so many of their most important conversations had taken place over the years. I am tired, Theresa admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed they had shared for 40 years. My bones ache and I move slowly. Sometimes I feel every single one of my 70 years. I know the feeling, Xavier said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. But I would not trade these years for anything. Every moment, even the difficult ones, has been worth it because I spent them with you. When I die, Theresa said seriously, I want you to know that I died happy, that my life was everything I could have hoped for and more, that loving you and being loved by you was the greatest gift I ever received. Do not talk about dying, Xavier said, his voice rough with emotion. We still have time left, years maybe. I know, but I want you to hear it anyway. I want you to know that if my first marriage taught me what love is not, you taught me what love is. You taught me that it is gentle and kind, that it builds up rather than tears down, that it gives freely without expecting anything in return. You taught me that home is not a place but a person, and you have been my home for more than 40 years. Xavier pulled her into his arms, and they held each other the way they had countless times before, drawing comfort and strength from each other's presence. After a moment, he pulled back enough to look into her eyes. You are my home too, he said. You are my everything, Theresa. You always have been, and always will be. They rejoined the party, spending the rest of the evening surrounded by family, eating good food, listening to music, and celebrating the life they had built together. As the sun set and the stars came out, Xavier and Theresa stood on their beloved porch one more time, watching their grandchildren chase fireflies in the gathering darkness. It has been a good life, Theresa said contentedly. The best life, Xavier agreed, and it had been truly. From the depths of despair and cruelty, they had climbed together into light and love. They had built something lasting and beautiful, a legacy of kindness and partnership that would continue long after they were gone. The doors of their home had always stayed open, just as Xavier had promised that first night. Open to family, open to friends, open to anyone who needed shelter or help or simply a kind word. Open because in a home built on love, there is nothing to fear and everything to share. This was the truth Margaret had never understood, that cruelty closes doors and hearts, while kindness opens them wide, that love given freely multiplies and returns tenfold, that the strongest foundations are built not on fear and control, but on respect and partnership. Xavier and Theresa had proven this truth every day of their marriage, and as they stood together under the stars, hands clasped and hearts full, they knew that whatever time remained to them would be spent the same way, loving each other, serving each other, and being grateful for the miracle of having found each other on that cold winter night so many years ago. The cowboy had given her a home where doors stayed open, but more importantly, he had given her his heart, and she had given him hers in return. Together, they had created something that would endure, a love story written in the red dust of Nevada, in the seasons of planting and harvest, in the lives of their children and grandchildren, in every kindness shown and every door left open for those in need. This was their legacy, and it would last forever, a testament to the transformative power of love, freely given and gratefully received. Their story had begun in winter cold and desperation, but it had blossomed into spring joy and summer abundance, and now, in the autumn of their lives, they could look back with satisfaction and forward with hope, knowing that they had lived fully and loved completely. And when the final sunset came, whenever that might be, they would face it together just as they had faced everything else, hand in hand and heart to heart, grateful for every moment and every blessing, ready for whatever came next because they had each other. This was love. This was home. This was everything that mattered. And it all began with a cowboy who stopped when he heard someone suffering in the cold, who offered shelter when he could have ridden past, who chose kindness over indifference and changed two lives forever. The doors stayed open, the fire stayed warm, and love filled every corner of the house, driving out the darkness and cold, creating a sanctuary where broken souls could heal and wounded hearts could learn to trust again. This was the gift Xavier gave Theresa that first night, and it was the gift they gave to everyone who entered their home, the knowledge that love is real, that kindness matters, that home is wherever your heart finds peace and your soul finds acceptance. And for Xavier and Theresa, home was always and forever each other, two souls who found their way through the darkness and into the light, building a life of meaning and purpose from the ashes of pain and despair, proving that it is never too late to begin again, never too late to choose love, and never too late to open the doors of your heart and let the warmth flow in. Their story was one of redemption and hope, of second chances and new beginnings, of the enduring power of human connection and the miracles that occur when two people choose to see past the surface to the beauty within. Years later, when both Xavier and Theresa had passed from this world, their children would tell their story to the next generation, making sure that the lessons learned were not forgotten. They would speak of the grandmother who survived cruelty and found courage, of the grandfather who offered kindness when it was desperately needed, of two people who built an empire of love from nothing more than compassion and determination. The ranch continued for generations, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own chapter while honoring the foundation laid by Xavier and Theresa. The house stood strong through decades and then centuries, its doors always open, its hearth always warm, a living memorial to the couple who proved that love can triumph over cruelty, that kindness is stronger than hate, and that home is not about walls and roofs, but about hearts and connections. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the Nevada plains and the stars shone bright in the endless sky, people would gather around fires and tell the story of the woman who was locked out in the cold and the cowboy who gave her a home where doors stayed open. They would tell it as a love story, because that is what it was. They would tell it as a cautionary tale about the dangers of cruelty and the importance of kindness, but mostly they would tell it as a testament to the human spirit, to the capacity we all have to choose love over hate, compassion over cruelty, hope over despair. Xavier and Theresa's legacy lived on, not just in the land and the buildings and the bloodline, but in the values they embodied and the love they shared. Their story became part of the fabric of that place, woven into the very earth, a reminder that even in the darkest times, even when the cold seems unbearable and the future looks hopeless, rescue can come in the form of one person willing to stop and help, one heart willing to open and embrace, one soul willing to offer shelter and ask nothing in return. This was their gift to the world, the knowledge that love is possible, that redemption is real, that it is never too late to start over and build something beautiful from the ruins of what came before. And somewhere in the starlit sky above that Nevada ranch, two souls danced together still, holding hands and sharing smiles, their love transcending time and space, eternal as the mountains and constant as the sunrise, a beacon of hope for all who came after, proving that true love, once found, never dies but lives on forever in the hearts of those touched by its grace. The doors stayed open, the fire burned bright, and love, the greatest force in the universe, triumphed over all.